Patients really suffer when they need access to the system. Listen, you're gonna be part. We invite you to be part of a clinical trial where you're gonna have easy and fast access to specialists and to care. These countries, they pretty much all have public healthcare system, just like in Canada. You're gonna be treated with dignity. The waiting list to get procedures done, especially high cost complex procedures.
There's the regulatory bodies that isn't as tough as the FDA.
We're making patients in Latin America have earlier access to these innovative technologies that they otherwise wouldn't have access. In an era where your cell phone is a medical device, your watch. Latin America will always have competition. There will always be countries. There's an abundance of opportunities for.
Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we delve into the ever changing and accelerating pace of global change and its impact on our lives. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, broadcasting live from the New World Studio. Today, we're diving into the world of AI and automation. As an enthusiast and expert in lead generation, I will guide you through understanding and leveraging these technologies for your business and for your personal use. And don't forget, AI and automation might be unstoppable forces, but that doesn't mean you are powerless. Tune in to learn how to make them work for you and not the other way around. But first, let's meet our guest. One. Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we navigate the changing world around us. I'm your host, Jump. Huh. Said it's failed
Yeah.
to start. Is it recording? Oh, it is recording. I'm just gonna edit that out. Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we navigate the changing world around us. I'm your host, Jampo Flores, specializing in lead generation and AI automation, here to help you understand how our world is changing and what it means for you. In this episode, we have Julio Martinez-Clark, founder of BioAccess, a leading CRO in Latin America, specializing in accelerating medtech clinical trials. With over 20 years of experience, Julio shares his insights on advancing medical devices through early feasibility studies, regulatory approval, and the unique opportunities in the Latin America's medtech landscape. And just FYI, there's 630 plus million people in Latin America. That's a huge range of people
Thank
that
you,
could be
John. I appreciate you
participants in
inviting me
clinical
here and
trials.
sharing my
Julio, it's
insights
a
with the
pleasure to have
audience.
you on the show. By the way, before we begin on the in-depth questions, because I do have some, can you give us a quick intro on who Julio is?
Sure. I started traveling around the world, helping Lucing and Nortel with their projects on the technical side, and then I moved onto the marketing side. I completed my MBA in the Boston area, and I really understood how is to do business around the world. I did some business in Europe, in the United States, but most importantly, I did a lot of business in Latin America. I got to travel to pretty much all countries. I mean, the majority of the major countries in the region. And I got to understand the different cultures, even though we speak the same language, except for Brazil, but it's similar. We share the same ancestry, the same history of the Iberian Peninsula, colonizers, and same religion, etc. So I really got to understand how business is done in this part of the world. And around 2010, I had a meeting with my brother, a informal meeting. We're having a drink, and he said he's Pedro. He's a doctor. He trained at Harvard as an interventional cardiologist, and he now runs a very large cardiovascular practice in the Miami area. So Pedro and I were chatting, and he said, "You know, Julio, we're doing some clinical testing for medical devices here in Colombia. We need some help since you're here temporarily doing some other
Yeah.
work. Can you help us obtain regulatory approvals and import the devices?" So that was my first experience with the clinical trial world, and that's how I got to get involved with this world. And fast forward 15, 20 years now, we've grown what started as an informal conversation into the leading medical device contract research organization in Latin America.
That's amazing. And I did see that you are you in love in Latin America because there's other countries that basically have similar benefits in doing clinical trials on, but Latin America is the one that you choose to
Well,
stay on
there's a
and actually
personal
do your
reason, of
business in.
course. There's
Is
an
there any
organic reason. I
particular
was
reason on
born
that?
and raised in the region, and of course, I feel more at ease in the region. I speak
Yeah,
Spanish, I speak Portuguese, and of course, I speak English. So I can navigate the waters of the region more easily
yeah,
than if I were to start doing business in Asia Pacific or another or Africa. So it's a natural fit.
yeah,
And that adds to the value that we bring to the table when we speak with our clients, that we are native Latin
yeah.
Americans, so we know how to speak both cultures, so to speak.
I found that there's three main benefits in doing clinical trials in Latin America. There's the lower operational cost. There's the high genetic
Yeah.
and demographic diversity. I mean, 663 million people. Come on. There's the regulatory bodies that
Well,
isn't as tough as the FDA.
it's
Is
a lot
there any other
easier to
benefits
recruit
beside those?
patients in Latin America. It's a lot easier to recruit investigators, and the red tape is a lot less.
Yeah,
So it's a lot easier to recruit
yeah,
patients, John, because the way the healthcare
yeah,
systems work in Latin America is such that patients really suffer when they need access to the system. These countries,
yeah,
they pretty much all have public healthcare systems, just like in Canada. So the waiting list to be seen by the primary care physician is long. The waiting list
yeah,
to be seen by a specialist is long. The waiting list to get imaging, diagnostic imaging, is long. The waiting list to get procedures done, especially high cost, complex procedures, is very
yeah,
long. So patients really suffer. They need an alternative. So when you approach patients and you tell them, listen, you're going to be part, we
yeah,
invite you to be part of a clinical trial where you're going to have easy and fast access to specialists and to care. And you're going to be treated with dignity. We're going to pay for your
yeah,
transportation and the transportation of your caregiver or your family member. We're going to pay you for lunch and meals and all that, hotels if it is necessary, anything to make sure you are compliant with the study, and you come back to the hospital to reach your site for follow-up visits. And the patient
yeah,
cannot say no. I mean, unless they have other reasons, they are afraid of the procedure or whatever. But most of the patients, they say yes.
yeah,
So that is a lot easier to recruit patients in that regard. It's also a lot easier to recruit investigators. What I mean by this is,
yeah,
in Latin America, you don't have these
yeah,
large,
yeah,
complex hospital systems like you have in the United States and other developed countries. You have smaller facilities, smaller hospitals where you can pick up the phone and speak with the CEO
yeah,
because you already have a relationship with them, and you can get things done a lot easier. There are many committees, like in the US, 20 committees to have the IRB committee review the study. That doesn't happen in Latin America. It's the ethics committee
yeah,
approval is really fast as long as you have the buy-in by the investigator, which takes just a Zoom meeting or two. So yeah, that's those
yeah.
two aspects make doing trials in Latin America a lot faster. Not to mention the red tape is a lot less than in the United States. The regulatory agencies see this as an opportunity to bring foreign investment into the
Yeah.
country and to benefit patients at large. So yes,
That's amazing. So basically, there's more benefits, there's more pros for the
exactly.
people who will be participating in these clinical trials than there is cons, especially because they can skip lines. They don't have lines because, yeah, that's the point. If you're part of a trial, we'll take care of everything
Hmm.
because we want you to be the, to have the perfect
Exactly.
regimen because
Yes.
we
Yes.
don't want the results to be tainted. It's amazing. And By the way, what are the jobs of these
Yes,
private
the private,
investigators?
the
Because
well,
you
it's not
have
private. I
told
mean,
it a couple
principal
of times.
investigators. That's the name. Yes, investigators. Yeah, investigators are
Investigators.
physicians, are usually specialists who are the leaders of the clinical trial. This is a heavily regulated industry. There are
Yeah,
international standards that you have to comply as a sponsor of a clinical trial, as a medical device company or pharmaceutical company. You, as an
yeah,
investigator, also have to comply with these international guidelines to do research on human subjects.
yeah,
So you need to pass a test to make sure you understand these international guidelines. It's called the GCP, or the Good Clinical Practice guidelines. And they review the study protocol, and they have to make sure they follow the protocol. There are specific criteria to
yeah,
include patients on the study, and the investigator needs to memorize those criteria to make sure he or she selects the right patients. There is criteria on what diagnostic images need to be done on the
yeah,
patients, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the protocol is like the Bible of the study, and the investigator usually is two investigator, a main investigator or principal
yeah,
investigator, and a sub investigator or secondary investigator or co-investigator. There are different terminology, but it's the same thing. It's usually two individuals who lead the study to make sure it complies with international guidelines, following
yeah,
the study protocol that was approved by the IRB, the Institutional Review Board or Ethics Committee.
yeah. It's amazing. And if we're not talking about the red tapes, the regulations, and all those other stuff, let's just talk about in terms of demographics. Is it, in your experience, easier for these companies to actually find perfect fits, medically fits for their trials if
Well, of
compared to
course,
US, just because there's
there's
more
an
people in
advantage
Latin America?
in Latin America because of the size of the region, of course, and you have countries like
Yeah,
Brazil, you have countries like Mexico, Colombia, Argentina. These are large countries. Brazil has
yeah,
200 and something million people. Mexico has 130 or so million
yeah,
people. Colombia has 53 million people. Argentina has 40 something million people. So these are large countries. And also, these are very urbanized countries. And by the way, I was reading something that a study recently, they were saying that Latin America
yeah,
is the most urbanized area in the world, a region in the world. I mean, the amount of cities that you have in Latin America is huge as compared to other parts of the world.
yeah,
So you have these high concentrations of populations in large
yeah,
metropolitan areas, like in Mexico City. Mexico City itself has 30 or so, almost 30, 20 something, 30 million people. Sao Paulo in Brazil, Buenos Aires, Argentina, Bogota,
yeah,
Colombia. So you have these large uh, demographic metropolitan areas with a high concentration of hospitals and people, and that makes recruitment a lot easier versus other countries where everything is more spread out. So it's more difficult to recruit because patients have to travel longer. Yes,
yeah. By the way, in Latin America, do all the countries in Latin America have the
that's a
same rules and
disadvantage if
regulations,
you look
or
at
do
it in
different
that
countries
way,
have their own?
because Latin America, although it's a large region that shares the same language, same history, same religion,
Yeah,
etc., same culture, it's very fragmented. You have 30 something
yeah,
countries in Latin America, and every country has its own rules and
yeah,
ways of this. So you have to be cognizant of that fact. And as a clinical trial sponsor or manufacturer, you
yeah,
have to seek approval in each of the countries where you want to do business. So most clients that we have, they seek approval in 2 or 3 countries to minimize
yeah,
the risk and to increase the chances of getting first approval in one country and start treating patients in that country, and while they wait in parallel for the other countries to get activated. So yes, you have to seek approval in different countries.
yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong. Most medtech companies, they seek approval into this one country, and when they see that their device or product is actually working,
Not
they then use
necessarily.
that proof
Yes and
to
no.
get
The
more
way it
approval from
works
other
is
countries.
that medical device startups, they go to Latin America to gather clinical data,
Yeah,
fast, lower cost, and easier clinical data as
yeah,
compared to the United States, Canada, or other parts of the world, the Western Europe, etc. So once they gather that
yeah,
clinical data from one country or two or three countries in Latin America under the umbrella of a clinical trial, they are not, by the way, they're not seeking to sell products in Latin America at this stage. They're not looking to
yeah,
place these products in the markets in these countries. They just want to get approval in
yeah,
these countries so that they can have a clinical trial done at a hospital in these countries. These are smaller clinical trials, usually up to 20 patients. So you're just
yeah,
validating the efficacy and safety of the device in this subset of patients.
yeah,
Once you have that clinical data that shows that the device is safe and efficacious, then
yeah,
you go back to the United States, you sit down with the FDA, you sit down with your investors, and you sit down with your potential acquirers or strategics or buyers
yeah,
like Medtronic, Boston Scientific, Stryker, because this is the goal of these companies. They're
yeah,
not looking to commercialize these innovations, they're looking to sell their companies. But for that to happen, they have to gather the clinical data, sit down with the FDA once they have the clinical data to negotiate
yeah,
with the FDA the size and the scope of a larger study, which is called the pivotal study under FDA guidelines in the United States with US population, although the FDA is flexible on that. Sometimes the FDA will allow you to include a percentage, like 10, 20% of the whole pivotal trial clinical data to come from overseas. So you can again use clinical data from Latin America or other parts of the
yeah,
world as a part of that whole pivotal larger study, which involves 20 research sites,
yeah,
200 patients, for example. So it's a larger clinical trial. So that's the first conversation that you have with the FDA. And
yeah,
at the same time, you will have conversation with your investors to raise more money
yeah,
because now you are de-risking the investment. Now you have shown, you have proved that the device is safe and efficacious, at least in 20 patients. But you want now to prove that it is safe
yeah,
and efficacious in 200 patients. That's why you're sitting down with the FDA to get this pivotal trial started. And the investors will give you more money to get this pivotal trial, larger clinical trial off the ground.
yeah.
And you also become more appealing to Stryker, Boston Scientific, Johnson and Johnson, potential buyers of your company.
That's amazing. And in your opinion, because you're doing this for over a decade now, are
Yes, I
the
think so. I
rules and
think Latin
regulations getting
America
stricter or not
is
really?
becoming a world player in the global economy, is aligning its regulations with international standards. And
By the way, continuing our conversation, do you think the regulations in Latin America is gonna get tougher in the next following years as they become more developed?
I don't necessarily think they're going to get tougher. I think they're going to become more aligned with international standards, which are not necessarily tougher. It's just more clear
Yeah,
and more predictable. As long as you have regulations in countries,
yeah,
things get more predictable. And what I really mean with this is that there are a few countries, many countries in Latin America, that don't really
yeah,
have a strong clinical research regulation, like Colombia. Colombia is still behind
yeah,
in its regulation versus Brazil, for example, that just updated the regulations a few months ago, around May of this year
yeah,
in 2024. So Brazil has become a player, an
yeah,
even more important player in the clinical trial industry because regulations are more streamlined and it's more
yeah.
predictable to get trials approved and conducted in Brazil. So again, I don't think they're going to become tougher, just become more aligned with the international standard. There's going to be more harmonization in the industry.
That's amazing because I was thinking, if they become more aligned on international standards, maybe they would become much tougher. But you said they're just gonna become more clear, and
More
that's
clear, and the process of getting a trial approved is going to be more predictable, which is what manufacturers want.
yeah,
They want predictability. They want to know that if they submit the package, the
yeah,
dossier, the application today, they're going to get reviewed by these and these standards or these
yeah,
requirements. They need a clear list of documents to
yeah,
submit. And also, they need to know when they're going to get review. They need to know that they're going to get review in 30 days. And that review will either say that the trial is approved or that it's missing XYZ
yeah,
documents or whatever. And then once they deliver or reply to those requirements,
yeah,
then they need to know they're going to get review again in another 30 days, something like that. They need predictability in the
yeah.
whole process, in the regulatory list of documents, and also in the timeline.
So as of right now, it's just more unpredictable to the point that you don't even know
Yes,
when it's gonna get refused.
in some
Yeah,
countries in Latin America, yes, it's kind of unpredictable. It's kind of
yeah,
on a gray zone where you don't really know what they're going to ask you for because they
yeah,
in the requirements uh, list they ask you for one thing, and once they review it, they ask you for
yeah,
something else. So that's not really, I mean,
yeah.
that's not conducive to do business in that country.
That is better because if you think about it, if you're in the medtech space and you're looking for investors, hey, fund me this amount of money so I can make this particular amounts of products and test them in Latin America. Most of them would not have the word that, maybe they will get lost in the bureaucracy. Maybe they won't get answers
Exactly.
for another year or
Yes.
another 2 years. But now we have this
Yes.
process. Hey, this is our plan. By this time, we're probably gonna get
Exactly.
approved. And yeah, I think there's gonna be
Yes.
more, as you said, better in terms of the medtech companies.
Absolutely. Yes.
What are the top trends that you're seeing currently in the medtech space in terms of the technological advancements that you're seeing for your clients?
It's obvious AI,
Yeah,
artificial intelligence. I mean, devices are becoming intelligent, very,
yeah,
very intelligent. They now have apps
yeah,
attached to them, some of them, of course, but increasingly more and more. Devices are leaving the hospital setting instead of being a
yeah,
hospital thing where the patient only uses at the hospital. Now you can use them at home or a nursing facility, and manufacturing of devices is becoming streamlined. I mean, it's a lot easier to manufacture devices. There are newer materials, newer manufacturing techniques that make devices smaller. So there are many advances in the
yeah,
industry. The number of patents in the medical device industry in the past few years
yeah.
have have doubled or something. I mean, there's a crazy exponential growth on the number of patents. So yeah, the trend is upward.
So do you think there's gonna be more medtech companies focusing on delivering this or developing these portable medical devices that can be used in homes because they're
Yes,
not, yeah, because you can have an AI that would guide you on how to do this step by step.
exactly, absolutely, yes, yes. Now we are in an era where your cell phone is a medical device, your
Yeah,
watch is a medical device. So yeah,
and
we can measure so many biomarkers by
yeah.
having a watch now in our hands.
No, I think the benefit and the pros and cons of having AI on these medtech devices and other devices in other industries is that there's gonna be one part of the market where they're thinking, how can I elevate my product with the use of AI? And there's just gonna be another market where how can I make this product have AI, where those products will just fall off because it's just gonna be like those how do you say this? The water coolers with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth that were popularized back then because they have no use other than they just have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And the other part
Yes,
where it actually can help people, I think that's where the money making is.
absolutely, absolutely, yes,
You know, in terms of other countries, because there's other countries. If we're not looking at you're in LA because you're more familiar with the demographic, with the culture, is there any other countries that is worth considering if some people are trying to get their medtech clinical trials streamlined?
Yes, outside of Latin America, of course. Well, within Latin America, there are countries that are more friendly,
Yeah,
that are friendlier to clinical trials than others, of course. But outside of Latin America, a lot of medical device companies go to Eastern Europe, although that may be changing because of
yeah,
there's a new EU, European Union regulation called the EU MDR, Medical Device Regulation, that will take over from the old regulation and is going to integrate all the
yeah,
countries into a single umbrella for the approval of clinical trials. And there's still a little bit of uncertainty on how that's going to work. So that may prevent clinical trials that will probably
yeah,
prevent more companies from going to that part of the world. And now with escalating war,
yeah,
Russia, Ukraine, North Korea is getting involved. The U.S. will probably increase the involvement. Who knows? So those two aspects are making Eastern Europe a little more um, difficult as a destination for medical device clinical trials. The other area is Australia and New Zealand. They are very good places to do early feasibility clinical
yeah,
trials. It's just that it's very far. The time difference
yeah,
between the United States and those places is difficult to maneuver. The travel time is
yeah,
long. And the countries are very spread out. I mean, the
yeah,
Australia, even though it's a large territory, the population is small,
yeah,
and I think it's 30, 40 million people, something like that, in the whole continent.
yeah,
And cities are all spread out.
yeah.
So that's a disadvantage. So
And as you said, compare that to Mexico City, which
exactly.
city alone
Yeah.
has the entire population.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. The beauty of Australia, one of the advantages of going
yeah,
to Australia is because you get a tax rebate or a tax
yeah,
incentive, which is 42 or something percent of whatever you invest, you get back. But you
yeah,
have to file paperwork, you have to create an entity in
yeah,
the country, you have to open a bank account, you have to have accountants and lawyers and all that to make that happen. So
yeah. And the problem in that is, sure, you're gonna be saving a lot of money in the rebates, but there's a ton more cost in terms of operational cost, and you know,
yes,
just the fact
yes.
that you need to wait more because you're gonna have to wait because there's not a lot
Exactly.
of people that
Exactly. That's
that
yeah.
invest. Well,
Recruitment may be an issue. You can get the trial approved very fast, but you
yeah,
may have issues with recruitment. That's true.
yeah. Your investigators are gonna spend a lot more time.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly.
In terms of these devices, are you seeing that in the past maybe few years that there's a trend where it's getting more focused on making it environmentally friendly and sustainable?
I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah,
I think at least implantable devices, I
yeah,
mean, which are the majority of devices I deal with, they are already environmentally friendly if
yeah,
you want to look at that way because they are implantable devices. They are in your body. They have
yeah,
to fit within your body. They cannot be rejected by your body. So they become part of us. They have biomaterials that are
yeah.
part of us when once they are implanted. So I don't really know how to answer that question.
In terms of the growth of the entire medtech industry, are you seeing that there's more companies starting by this year compared to the
Oh
previous?
yes, 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 exactly. Usually these
Yeah,
companies start at a university,
yeah,
and if you look at the funding
yeah,
for these research, is usually funding from the NIH, the
yeah,
National Institutes of Health in the United States. The United States is the country that invests the most in biomedical research.
yeah,
I think it's over $50 billion or something like that. It's some crazy amount. I mean, and that amount gets trickle down or goes trickle down into all these universities, and those are the intellectual properties, the patents that these startups use. They license those patents and they create
yeah,
these companies with these patents, and then they raise the money and they develop these technologies. So as we said, there's increasing research newer devices or newer drug molecules. So if you look at all the market
Yeah.
research reports, you're going to see upward trends on either drug development or medical devices because technologies, especially artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
is making drug development a lot easier, is making devices a lot smarter. So yes, the trend is upward.
In terms of COVID-19, because I assume that most of the clinical trials that you were doing back then were stopped or at least paused by some time, or if
Yes.
am I wrong?
Well, they were not really
Yeah.
stopped. They became more challenging
Yeah.
to conduct, challenging in regards to patients coming to a hospital, challenges on a nurse coming to a patient's home. So
Yeah.
we have to use a lot of telemedicine and things like that. But
Yeah.
no, we somehow managed to continue the studies.
Yeah. By the way, can you talk more about telemedicine and what that is?
Well, telemedicine, as I understand it, is any interaction with a patient that is not in the same location where you are.
Yeah.
That can take many shapes and forms or regulations on what you can do, what you cannot do, depending on the
Yeah.
country, depending on the state, if you're in the United States. But it's basically that. I mean, any interaction that you can have with a patient um, where the patient is not in the same location where the
Yeah.
service provider is.
What part of the clinical trials can actually be uh, done
Oh,
by
a lot,
telemedicine?
a lot, a lot, a
Yeah.
lot, a lot. On drug trials,
Yeah.
it's usually dispensing a medication
Yeah.
to a patient. On medical device trials, is implanting a device on a patient.
Yeah.
I mean, at least there's got to be one or two interactions. The signing of the informed consent can now be done remotely. Well, a lot of people still do paper. For that, you need to be in the same location as the patient. But that
Yeah.
eventually will go away. Eventually, we're going to have
Yeah.
e informed consent. That's how they're called, e informed consent, electronic informed consent. So
Yeah.
you don't need the patient to come to you. You can just have a Zoom or a team video call
Yeah.
like this to sign the informed consent. Because for the informed consent, it usually takes about an hour. You have to explain
Yeah.
the patient the risks and benefits,
Yeah.
etc., of the trial. And um, on medical devices, of course, you have to, also on drug trials, there's a second encounter where you need the patient to come to the facility and
Yeah.
take the drug, or you take the drug to the patient's home. A nurse can take the patient, can take the drug to the patient's home. But the rest of the follow-up visits can be done remotely.
Yeah.
For implantable device, the patient needs to come to the OR at a
Yeah.
hospital or a ambulatory surgical center, and that's where the implantation of the device, the procedure, will take place.
Yeah.
And once that's done, the follow-up visits, they can be done remotely. Only the patient has to come back for
Yeah.
diagnostic imaging like MRI
Yeah.
or CT scan or something like that.
And also, I'm assuming that most of the you talking with the patient on if there's no part that needs to be done medically, you just do it via Zoom or Gmail.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Yes.
That's amazing, especially because if you're thinking about it, most of the uh, clients that you have are from the US. So instead of them
Yes.
having to go to Latin America to interview or follow up with a patient or have somebody do it that is not as qualified as the person who actually are making the medtech products, you can just talk with them via Zoom.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think that
Yeah,
the right terminology is decentralized clinical trial. You're
yeah,
decentralizing the clinical trial. You're not making the hospital the hub of the clinical trial.
yeah.
You're decentralizing everything. Yes,
So you're allowing more access because there's a lot more people who can do it
exactly.
instead of not. Because
Yes,
if maybe you have this great candidate for a clinical trial, but they live at 2 hours or an hour away
yes,
from the hospital, it's not really ideal because there's tons of risk in terms of them inhaling an awful smoke or other stuff that can just screw up the trial.
exactly. That's
No,
exactly right.
looking towards maybe in the next 5, 10 years, do you think there's gonna be more companies who are gonna go and come to you that says, "Hey, I need help," and do this clinical trial via Latin America, or do you think they're gonna explore other countries or have have less startups by then?
Well, I think the if you look at all the market research reports,
Yeah,
at least the ones that I've seen, and at least the people that I talk to in the industry, everybody is very optimistic. Everybody is
yeah,
seeing an upward, a hockey stick trend
yeah,
in the number of companies, the amount of funding, etc. Latin America will always have competition. There will
yeah,
always be countries. I mean, tomorrow, probably a country in Africa will realize that they can become a magnet for medical device clinical trials, and
yeah,
that country will compete with countries in Latin America. But that's
yeah,
perfectly fine. We need diversity. I mean, sponsors, manufacturers of medical devices need options, and no country is perfect. No
yeah,
hospital is perfect. Some countries have advantages, some countries have disadvantages,
yes,
some countries have both. I mean, it's just a mixed bag of opportunities, of options. So yeah, I think, I mean, our competition is really other countries. We're the leading medical
yeah,
device CRO in Latin America. We're the only ones actually doing this type of work in Latin America.
yeah,
The other CROs in Latin America that you find fall in two categories. They're either American CROs like IQVIA, PPD,
yeah,
Parexel that have operations in
yeah,
countries in Latin America, and they primarily focus on pharmaceutical drug clinical
yeah.
trials and
So
on later phases.
yeah, so most of them focus on the bigger companies.
Yes, and they also focus on big pharma,
Yeah,
Pfizer, Novartis, Merck, big pharmaceutical manufacturers. The other CROs in Latin America are smaller,
yeah,
local, homegrown CROs. Like
yeah,
Mexico has two, Argentina has two,
yeah,
Brazil has two, just a handful of local homegrown CROs. And they do vaccine clinical trials, they do pharmaceutical drug clinical trials,
yeah,
and once in a while, they do a combination drug device clinical
yeah,
trial, and once in a while they do a medical device clinical trial.
yeah,
That's fine. We're just different. We specialize 100% on medical device clinical trials and
yeah,
also on early feasibility, first in human.
yeah.
So it's a niche, and there's room
So
for everybody
yeah.
to compete because it's an abundant world. There's an abundance of opportunities for all of us.
So, in terms of startups or smaller companies that are looking to just get the approval and the genuine early stages data that they need, you're the face of the CRO company in Latin America.
Yes, exactly.
That's
We
amazing.
are. We are. We are.
And we've discussed the benefits of having these clinical trials for the medtech companies. There's benefits for the patients that are getting these clinical trials. What do these countries actually get if the medical trials are done in their country?
Great question. Well, first of all, the patient benefits
Yeah,
tremendously by having access to an innovative medical device
yeah,
that they wouldn't have access otherwise
yeah,
without the clinical trial, right? Because the way the industry works is that once a new medical device is in the market, is FDA approved or EU approved, CE
yeah,
mark, the device gets sold in the major markets for
yeah,
many years, 10, 20 years.
yeah,
And Latin America is usually last. Africa, I mean, the developing world is usually last in
yeah,
receiving those innovations 10, 20 years after it's available in the major markets. And
yeah,
that's a shame. That's bad. So we're closing the gap. We're making patients in Latin America have earlier access to these innovative technologies that
yeah.
they otherwise wouldn't have access to.
So basically, you're reversing the roles. Instead of let's say US getting the first devices, then it goes to Latin America in maybe 10,
Yes.
20 years. Latin America is now getting those devices first.
Yes.
The countries that originated from are getting it much down the road.
Exactly, exactly. Yes,
Some,
that's the first advantage. The
yeah,
second advantage is the transfer of knowledge, advanced transfer
yeah,
of knowledge, because you have these great minds from the United
yeah,
States, from Western Europe. There are the innovators, the
yeah,
innovator countries. They come to Latin America. They work alongside the local
yeah,
physicians, the local investigators, and there is a beautiful transfer of knowledge
yeah,
that elevates the
yeah,
level of medical care in those countries, right? And third is the economic benefit. There is a famous research that IQVIA did a couple of years ago or so that says that in average, a country in Latin America receives around $17,000 per patient
Yeah.
in direct investment. So
Yeah.
that's $17,000. That's a lot of money in Latin America.
Yeah.
That's of great impact for local economies, and that's accounting for what the hospitals get paid for participating in the trial. That's the
Yeah.
investigators' fees. That's the stipend, the help that you give the patient for transportation, for meals. That's the salary of the study coordinator
Yeah.
and all the staff that gets involved. So that's a big economic impact for a country.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Genuinely. And we're seeing a greater focus on improving the data collection for these medtech devices because data is key. And most of the time, it's we get those by having those AI because the medtech companies are integrating those first, the AI. Do you see that there's maybe a future where you don't need a hospital at all to actually get these medtech devices to the person who's gonna use them?
That's the topic that we discussed before, John, decentralized clinical trials.
Yeah,
I think they're very, very applicable. What you're saying is it will probably become a reality,
yeah,
probably on clinical trials where you don't need to implant
yeah,
a medical product or you don't need to administer a
yeah,
drug on a patient.
yeah,
On those trials, for example, there are trials where you don't need to touch the patient. There are trials where
yeah,
all you have to do is just put a watch or
yeah,
give the patient a cell phone just to monitor certain vital signs. I mean, those trials will probably be 100% decentralized.
yeah,
But if you have an implantable device or you have a molecule, a drug molecule that you
yeah,
have to give to the patient to take orally or intravenously, or you have to open the heart and implant the device, then of course you need to have the patient in the same room as the investigator.
yeah,
But that will be kind of this semi-decentralized because the rest
yeah.
of the visits you can probably do remotely.
And what's the benefit of just in doing this clinical trials decentralized? What's the main benefits besides the lower cost and the lower time to do it?
I think the main benefit is real-time data collection, real-time data collection, and also the patient. The patient is at home. They don't have to
Yeah,
travel in a big city. Sometimes the patient is an older patient. You don't want to move the patient too much. So
yeah.
I think it's in the well-being of the patient.
Plus, in my opinion, I think it's gonna be better for the medtech companies because they have more control on more points of communication instead of having to rely on another people to
Yes,
actually
on a
give them
third
the
party.
data. Yeah,
Exactly. Yes,
it's
yes,
amazing.
yes.
For the people who are thinking about starting up a medtech companies, because you're very versed in this topic, what's your advice for them? The main step by step that you think would be better for them? Maybe, hey, if you got a product, try and get it tested in Latin America and get those to your investors, and you get more funding, or that kind of stuff.
Well, I think the first step is look at the options. Well, I
Yeah,
have Eastern Europe, I have Australia, New Zealand, and I have Latin America. Those are
yeah,
usually the three options that these companies have.
yeah,
If you are in the United States, probably Latin America is better
yeah,
for you because it's closer, etc. If you are in an Israeli company, for example, or a
yeah,
Western European company, probably Eastern Europe is
yeah,
a good option. It's probably the top option for you.
yeah,
And Australia is kind of in the middle
yeah,
if you want to travel that far, if the benefits outweigh the disadvantages. Second, once you look at your options, I think is find the right local help. By that I mean make sure you have the right CRO.
yeah,
Make sure you are not dealing with somebody who does a vaccine trial today,
yeah,
a biotechnology molecule tomorrow, and once in a while they do a medical device trial because medical device trials are very complex. It has its
yeah,
own terminology, it has its own ISO standards, it has its own regulatory pathways. Usually, the
yeah,
regulatory agency has two divisions, two
yeah,
committees, the medical device division and the drug division. So, if you are not experienced in dealing with the medical device division, you're going to get
yeah,
confused with the requirements. You're going to get confused with how to navigate the waters of
Yeah.
getting the trial approved. Versus if you have a CRO that is 100% focused on medical device early
Yeah.
feasibility clinical trials, they know what to do. They know what investigators to tap into. They know what hospitals to contact. They know exactly what documents you need, what preclinical information, but what biocompatibility testing you need. Then
Yeah.
they know everything because they've done it for 20 years. So they know how to get the trial approved. So those are probably my two advices. Yeah.
And for those who are not aware on what the CRO actually do, what do you actually do in terms to help your clients?
Well, a CRO will help you first find the right investigator that matches
Yeah.
your study with the right patient population. Second, the CRO will help you translate the documentation into the local language and put together the right dossier package with the right documentation
Yeah.
based on the requirements of that specific institutional review board or ethics committee or
Yeah.
regulatory agency and get it approved fast. And third, the CRO will help you manage the study.
Yeah.
That includes importing the investigational devices into the country and placing them at the hospital. It will help you make sure by having weekly meetings with the investigator and the staff that they're recruiting, that they're
Yeah.
looking and screening the right patients, et cetera, et cetera. And
Yeah.
also will help you monitor the study, which is a big part of managing a study. You have to monitor by international standards,
Yeah.
guidelines. You have to send somebody to review all the documentation, make sure it complies with international guidelines, and also it will the CRO will help you report
Yeah.
anything that you need to report there to the regulators or to the institutional review board to comply with international guidelines to
Yeah.
make sure the study is being done correctly. And also you need the CRO to report any adverse events, possible adverse
Yeah.
events in the study.
In terms of mistakes that are commonly done by other CROs, because I believe there's also other CROs that are doing what you're doing in Latin America. What do you think is the mistakes that they're doing that you're not doing and actually makes you a better option?
The big mistake that I can think of, John, is the lack of specialization.
Yeah.
I mean, they are promiscuous in a way. I mean, they do vaccine trials, they do biotechnology trials, they do drug trials, pharmaceutical
Yeah.
drug trials, they do food trials, cosmetic trials. So
Yeah.
these CROs do everything. They need to survive.
Yeah.
They do anything that comes on their desk. We, on the contrary, we only do medical device early feasibility clinical trials.
Yeah.
We are 100% specialized. We're the only company in Latin America that specializes in this niche.
Yeah.
That's the big
Yeah.
mistake that I think companies do, which is in the general category of choosing the wrong partner. You have
Yeah.
to choose the right partner.
It's amazing.
Yes.
And since we're nearing the end of the podcast, do you have any advice on people who are looking to start CRO companies in Latin America? Besides the advice that don't compete with you because you'll crush them.
Well, it's not an easy business.
Yeah.
You need to usually it's a business that former employees of IQVIA, PPD, Parexel, the big CROs that work for
Yeah.
big pharma have started a few years ago, 10, 15 years ago. That's usually the profile of the local CROs that you see in Latin America, in Mexico, Argentina, Colombia. Well, not Colombia. Colombia, that's probably one.
Yeah.
Brazil. So the advice is find a specialization, find a
Yeah.
niche. Don't do everything because you're not really gonna have good market fit for the right audience if you do a little bit of everything. Just find a specialization. If you are gonna
Yeah.
become the go-to CRO for cosmetic clinical trials or food clinical trials, just specialize on that and become the
Yeah.
best in Latin America on that topic and generate great content to educate the audience on that
Yeah.
topic. So I think that's my advice.
That's amazing. And do you have any advice on life?
Well, you have to be entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
Always look for new business, new opportunities to tackle, for try to find problems to solve by
Yeah.
creating a company around the solution of that problem. Um, have a specialization, have a niche market where you become the best, so you create a monopoly where nobody
Yeah.
can get in because you are so specialized it will take other companies years and years to
Yeah.
catch up with you because you are the best in the world at that specific industry or that
Yeah.
specific activity in that industry, and be persistent.
Yeah.
You have to keep trying. Yeah, I mean, it's just nobody learns how to drive on the first try. You have to
Yeah.
drive at least 100 miles to start understanding how to maneuver a car. Yes,
That's amazing. And again, I want to thank you personally for joining us on the New World podcast.
absolutely, John. Thank you for having me.
That's all for today's episode of the New World podcast. We have explored some fascinating topics with our amazing guests, shedding light on the upcoming new world. If you enjoyed today's episode and today's discussion and want to stay updated the future episodes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to the podcast. And if you found value on what we have discussed, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Remember, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, or if you are interested in being a guest in the future, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or email me at john.paul@aicinix.com and add New World Podcast all capital in the subject line so I can see it. I always love hearing from our listeners. And don't forget to check out our amazing guests. You can find more information about them via the contact details we provided earlier. Again, thank you for tuning in on the New World Podcast. I know your time is very important and I try to always make the next episode better than the last. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, keep innovating. This is John Paul Flores signing off from the New World Podcast.